How can you not be inspired to create when the entire sky is lit up? Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel of crafting, crochet and knitting. My name is Nikki and welcome to my little yarniverse. So back in September, me and my husband went to Tromso, Norway in search of Aurora, aka the Northern Lights. And if you're new here, then let me tell you that my channel name is inspired by my love of and PhD in astronomy, so it should come as no surprise that this was pretty much a dream vacation for us. And because this was me in Norway, there was also yarn. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about it. So first off, let's talk about yarn shops. There were two that I visited, and I visited both of them more than once. The first one that I will mention is the Strikkestudio in Tromso itself, and I was surprised by this one because from the outside I really didn't think it was going to be a very big store, but actually it kind of stretches all the way into the back and it's absolutely full of yarn, and also like jumpers and cowls that you can buy. If you're not a knitter yourself, you can buy some hand knit things. So yeah, a nice selection of items, and if you're looking at the yarn, then you can expect a lot of woolly wools and Norwegian brands or blends, so that was great. I picked up a few purchases there, but there was some like cotton and other blends as well, so it's not like it's only wool, but expect a lot of woolly wools. Notably, I picked up some Hillesvag Ullvarefabrikk. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And I got this in Vilje. I also got a Solje as well, but the Vilje is for me and the Solje is for my husband. His was a very greeny green and mine is more of a tealy green because I'm trying to theme all of my yarn from Tromso on the Northern Lights. So this was definitely inspired by that. And we saw some cowls there that looked really cozy and were very simple, and I figured, okay, well, I don't need to buy the cowl because if I buy the yarn then I can make that, and the person at the store recommended 100% wool, and that's why we picked up these two. And then I also picked up some Rauma Garn, and this is also a 100% Norwegian wool, and I got it in some navies and tealy green again because yes, this is going to be Northern Lights again. This is the yarn specifically that I picked up to make myself my Tromso souvenir for my souvenir wall. Now, bearing in mind, I've mentioned the souvenir wall a few times now, it's going to be this wall behind me here, but there is nothing on it yet because I'm incredibly slow at getting around to making some things. I am making some things in the background, I just haven't got around to videoing them for you yet, so I kind of don't want to put them up and spoil things for you, but these will eventually be turned into something and popped on the wall, and they'll be Northern Lights related. So I got those. And then the last thing I got from there that was very notable, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because there's a story behind this yarn that I will be telling you in a later section. But I did pick up some Sandnes Garn, a cotton merino blend, again in navy and this light blue, again to be sort of Northern Lights inspired, and it was a bit of an experiment, but I will talk more about that in a bit. So next, let me tell you that if you are ever travelling through Oslo airport, you need to look out for yarn on the go. And that is the second yarn shop that I went to. Yes, you heard me right. This is a yarn shop in the airport. How cool is that? So they have yarn in an airport. I was absolutely amazed that they have a yarn shop in an airport, and on my way home I actually really needed to go to this yarn shop because I realised that I was going to finish my book quickly on the plane because we had quite a long plane journey home and I was so close to the end that I needed to have something else to do, and I didn't have another book with me, and all of my knitting stuff was on metal needles, and so I had put that in my hold luggage. So I nipped into this yarn shop and I got myself some wooden needles and just some simple autumnal coloured yarn, just so that I can like experiment or fiddle with some colour work on the plane home. So I figured that the wooden needles were a bit of an investment. I'm not normally a wooden needles kind of person, but we intend to do a fair bit of travel this year, and we're going to be packing light, which means that we're going to be working off of cabin luggage, and I don't really want my favourite metal needles to be travelling with me and get taken off me at airport security. So I can now say when I'm travelling that I'm taking knitting needles that I bought in a yarn shop in the airport at Oslo. So I promised you a story about my yarn purchases in Tromso, but before we get to that, we have to first go back slightly to episode 105, where I put together this beautiful combination of tealy green colours. And as we were approaching September, I cast these on into a stripy t-shirt. So that meant that this was the project that I took to Tromso with me, and any time that we were just sat chilling in a cafe, I would be knitting on this jumper. When we were on the minibuses for the Northern Lights tours, I would be knitting on this jumper. And I actually realised that I was accidentally working on a Northern Lights inspired t-shirt. I mean, it's not really Northern Lights inspired because I hadn't got this inspiration when I started knitting on it, but retroactively it was inspired because it was that same tealy green colour that we were seeing when we were spotting Northern Lights on our chases. So I just spent every minute that I could on this. I wasn't putting it down, and I ended up making a pretty substantial chunk of the yoke. So much so that about halfway through our holiday I had enough to try it on. And I absolutely hated it. So it was a little crushing looking in the mirror and deciding, one, it was too big. I don't know why I thought it wouldn't be too big, because I was fashioning it off of a previous knitted shirt that I had made, that I had decided the yoke was too big and it was like too much positive ease, and the sleeves were too short compared to the bagginess that was around the torso, and it didn't look great. And for some reason I was copying this pattern in this stripy t-shirt, and did I expect it to be different results? Did I expect that I would just put a slightly longer sleeve on it and it'd be fine? Maybe, I don't know. But it was way too big. But on top of it being way too big, it was also the case that the stripes that I was building out were they were all the same size, and that was in a way that didn't really look right to me, I thought. And also lots of lighter colours were being grouped together at the top, and that was on me. That's the way I was doing it, but I didn't like that. That doesn't suit me at all. I don't wear lighter shades. I wear like autumnal shades or those dark greens, those emeraldy greens. So I was really hoping that those emeraldy greens would be showing through, and actually all I was getting was overwhelming sagey tealy colours that they're not my colour, and so I didn't like it. I really hated it, and there was too much contrast in some places as well that didn't look intentional. It looked like it was partially meant to be contrast, partially meant to be a tonal fade, and overall it just wasn't very nice at all. And yeah, too big, wrong colour, it wasn't great. So there I was in our apartment in Tromso, about to go on another Northern Lights tour, and instead of being able to take this project with me, I frogged it all back. Every single bit of it, because folks, there is no reason to keep knitting on something purely because you started it. It is a complete waste of your time, it's a waste of your yarn, and this yarn was expensive yarn. This was Earth and Crafty Bird hand dyed yarns, so I can't let that go to waste, so I frogged it all back. However, what that does mean is that we still had several days of our trip in Tromso, and I was down a knitting project. So we picked up the Sandnes Garn merino cotton blend that I showed you earlier, and I started to draw out a pattern that was inspired by a hat that I had seen in the yarn shop that was showing off the bridge over the fjord and also the Arctic Cathedral as quite iconic Tromso landscapes. But I didn't want a hat, I wanted a cowl. So just show you the colours again. We have got this light blue and this navy blue. I'm not sure that that navy blue is showing up very well on camera, but we got those colours, and we worked on this. So I added, I'm going to fold that down just so I can show you the colour work. I added the Northern Lights part myself. I just kind of sketched out what I had seen in the sky on one of my trips, and then I put that onto some square paper at the same time as putting the Arctic Cathedral on square paper and the bridge onto the squared paper, and trying to see like where I should be drawing, where I should be knitting the lighter colour in order to get the effect of the Northern Lights. So I'm really happy with that, and it has this really lovely 1x1 rib neck to it, which is really chunky. It's not actually finished at the moment because I knit on most of this whilst I was still in Tromso. The 1x1 rib knit up really quickly, and I even got some of the colour work started whilst I was in Tromso, and when I got home I decided that I was going to finish the colour work, but I had some other projects that I needed to pick up on, and so I decided that I would get to the bottom of the colour work and then I would save the back for another time. And yes, that time has still not arrived. I really ought to pick this up soon and finish it because yes, otherwise it's just sitting here and it could be being worn. I suppose not so much as it's going to get warmer soon, but if I get to the autumn and I need something warm, then this won't be finished and ready. So I should probably finish this. I think what I was stuck on is whether to repeat the colour work down the back so that the same will be on the back as it is on the front, or whether I actually need to just use one colour. And I'm slightly worried because I don't think I've got enough navy to do the whole back in navy, but I also can't run out of the navy if I'm going to do the colour work. So I think that's what's been stopping me from picking this up and working on it to the end. So you might be wondering, what happened to all that yarn that you frogged? Well, that is currently in a new project. This is the, and I apologise now for the pronunciation, Revoulé? I think I'll put it in the description because there's no way that you'll be able to get the spelling right just from how I pronounced that just then. It's by Josie Quinn, and it is this intarsia t-shirt. I've currently been working on the back panel, and you can see how that intarsia is actually breaking up those lighter teals nicely. I actually got my husband to code up a colour combination for me because I think the original pattern only had 3 colours in, whereas I have 5 of mine, and of course one of my colours I have more of than the other because that was a 100g skein from the Crafty Bird, whereas my other ones were 4 50g colours from the Earth tonal collection. So yes, I had my husband code up a solution that took into account the rules I had about I don't want there to be 2 of the lighter colours next to each other at any point, and I also took into consideration the yarn weights that I had available. I subtracted what I would need for the neckline and for the hems and the sleeves, but I'm really happy with how this is working up. I don't expect you all to find somebody in your life who can code you up a solution, so what I will do is I will leave all of the instructions on my Ravelry page, because for 2026 my goal, it's not really a goal I suppose, but I want to use Ravelry to document all of my makes instead of using a very messy list on my whiteboard. So yeah, I have a Ravelry page now, and I will link that in the description as well. So lots of exciting projects that all remind me of Tromso. So I'm going to chat a little bit now about the Aurora Chases that we were on. We booked onto 2 tours because the benefit is that they have these minibuses and they take a bunch of people. They can drive you up to 2.5 hours away from the city to get to some of the best spots, some of the dark sky areas, and to get away from bad weather if you need to. And on our very first night of looking for Aurora, this was completely necessary because we checked the forecast for the week and it was looking pretty miserable. And I was getting very pessimistic, especially in Tromso itself. It had been cloudy and rainy all day, and in the end we drove about 2 hours south on the mainland just to try and get away from the rain. And again, this was making me pretty pessimistic about our chances. We pulled up to this really cute little lake, and there was sort of no there was like 1 or 2 houses in the area. It was not a proper village or anything like that. There was no main lights, and it was very dark, and there was just a gap in the cloud that our tour guide spotted northern lights through. And this is quite the skill. What we kind of figured out by the end is that if you are in such a dark place that doesn't have any city lights, so there's no light pollution, and if you go in a week like we chose when there was no moon visible, then if you see any light in the sky, any glow at all, it can't be anything except for the northern lights. So it's kind of like a process of elimination. And this didn't really, we didn't really cotton onto this like the first time we saw them. It was like after the second time we were like, yeah, no, I get it now. But yeah, this first time there was just this tiny gap in the cloud, and we could basically like barely even see it with our eyes. And as we're setting our cameras up, we're seeing this like very, very faint green glow. So we took some photos, and I'm feeling a little bit happier, but I'm still sort of thinking like, oh, what if they're gonna say that, well, you saw the lights and that's it, and it ends up being like a really disappointing tour. But thankfully that was not the case. We ended up driving to another dark sky location. It was kind of like this mountain road rest area, and it was actually pretty close to a main road, but there was a line of trees that kind of blocked the car light out of a lot of the photos that we were taking. And the sky had kind of cleared up a little bit more in this time, which meant that we had bigger gaps. There were still clouds, but there were much bigger gaps, so much so that when those lights started to become apparent, you could actually see some structure. So the northern lights have sort of columns and like bands of structure to them, and sometimes you can see the faintest hint of the green light and the faintest hint of the red light with your eyes. But typically what you're going to be seeing is a white light, because the human eye is not absorbing enough light to be able to detect colour like fast enough. So our eyes are working quite quickly, whereas with the camera we can hold the aperture open for longer and collect more light, and so we can actually determine the colour because there's enough light to work with. So yeah, we can see with our own eyes the faintest hint of the colour, but then we're taking photos and actually seeing it like properly through our cameras. So yeah, what we ended up seeing in the end was these sort of columns of light and a sort of like a swaying, flowing kind of motion as the band of light was working across the sky. Now, our second tour basically just didn't even work, right? So it was a few days later, we went out on the tour, and this time they drove us north. Now, the location was kind of surreal and kind of incredible. They drove us onto the island of Kvaloya, and this is like, if you think of what Norwegian fjords look like, very like mountain sea kind of structure, they really were, right? This island was, it feels like such an odd shape, like with sort of fingers of mountains stretching out into the Arctic water. And we ended up driving around this very rural island and nestling ourselves in a slot that was a fjord right between two incredibly high mountains, and on a beach on the beach of that fjord. It was quite a strange sensation. We set up a campfire. The only problem was there was so much cloud, and this cloud, like, there were gaps in the cloud, but those gaps just refused to be in the direction that we would see the lights. They just were constantly in the complete opposite direction, like they were mocking us, and it was incredibly frustrating. But we had some hot drinks, we had some snacks, and then unfortunately we did have to kind of call it a night. So we hopped back on the bus and drove home. But excitingly, on our way back, we saw a reindeer, a wild reindeer, just chilling out, walking down the road. So of course we had to stop to let it go past, and everyone was trying to snap photos with their phones, and then yeah, once it was gone, we could just continue on our way. So again, a very surreal location followed by a very surreal encounter with wildlife. So we didn't just rely on the tours for our aurora chasing, but anytime that there was reasonable weather, we would walk to a darker part of the city or out of the city entirely in order to try and see aurora, and we were definitely rewarded for the effort. So on the day that had the best forecast, we decided that we were going to make the 45-minute trek from our apartment over the fjord bridge to the cable car station. Now, this was not some quaint little bridge that you might find in the UK. This was massive. It was spanning the entire fjord. So it was properly rising to an incline and then declining again. The majority of that 45-minute walk was going over the bridge. It has to allow cars and people to go over the top, but then also boats to go underneath it. So it was big. And then once we got to the other side, we had to continue walking up the foothills of the mountain to get from the edge of the bridge to the cable car station, which only ended up taking like maybe 10 minutes or so. But by that point, we were already very tired. Well, I was at least. So we get to the cable car station, and thankfully we can take the cable car the rest of the way up the mountain. We actually went in the daylight though, because there is a viewing platform up there that is well known for looking at the Northern Lights, but also for looking out over the city. So we wanted some photos of that in the daytime, wanted to see what that was like in the daytime, because in September, everything was very autumnal and it was so beautiful from up there. And when we had finished having a look, taking photos, we decided to go inside the cafe that's at the top and get some hot drinks and do some knitting. So I was obviously working on my previous project that I frogged, but then Mr. Yarniverse was knitting on his gloves, which are still an ongoing project. But yeah, after a little while, the sun started to go down. So at sunset, we went back out and we took more photos because it was very pretty as well, watching the sunset over the mountains. There was this beautiful contrast of shadow. Once the sun was low enough that the mountains were actually making the fjord at sea level dark, there was still this beautiful pale pink glow on the tops of the mountains in the area. So that was absolutely lovely to see. And after, again, we'd finished looking at the sunset, we went back inside to the cafe again and got changed and put some warmer layers on, and waited for twilight. So this astronomical twilight, when it would be dark enough for the stars to be coming out, because we wouldn't be able to see the Northern Lights without that level of darkness. So I think it was about 8 o'clock that we ended up going back outside. We took some photos of Tromso in the dark, all lit up, because that was beautiful as well. And then we decided to get away from the city lights and the tourists on the platform and pitch up our tripod for aurora hunting a little bit further up the mountain. And we didn't have to wait very long, because before we knew it, there was this little band of light snaking its way up from the horizon. There was not a cloud in the sky. It was so beautifully clear, and so the light that we were seeing, this sort of band snaking its way from the horizon, it was getting longer, it was getting brighter. So this is like a white light glow at this point, because it's still there's still a lot of twilighty light, so there's not a lot of colour contrast yet, but it basically starts growing and growing and growing until it goes all the way over your head across the entire sky, which was so incredible. And then as it got darker, like the sky background got darker and the aurora was incredibly bright, you could, again with your eye, you could see where the green and the red were, like quite clearly. So you didn't see them as green or red, but there was these like tints to the white light where you were like, that's definitely the green part and that's the red part. So that was really amazing. And then we're watching it with this sort of flowing as it sort of makes its way across the sky and brightens in places and then dims in other places, and it was so incredible. And I recount this next bit with both amazement and also a bit of defeat because right when my husband, having seen all of this and thought it was incredible, decided that he was going to, it must have been an hour or so, he was going to go and get us some fresh drinks, some hot chocolate from the cafe to take out to bring. Right as he did that, the entire sky lit up, and I am not exaggerating, like a good 90 to 95% of the sky was light, and you could see the hints of green, you could see the hints of red, but you could also see hints of purple, you could see the column structure everywhere. There was not, my photos actually, my time lapses from this evening are not that great, because there was not a angle in the sky with my lenses that I could take that would capture enough of the sky to kind of show contrast between the background and the light, because there was so much light present in the shot that it actually looked like I was just taking photos and moving my tripod and smearing the light out. And it's only if you notice the occasional pinpoint of a star in there that you realise, no, that's the light. So my pictures were not great, but the display was amazing. And at one point those columns of light twinkled, like properly danced. So I think people do talk about like when the northern lights dance, and a lot of what we saw was this more flowing slow motion, whereas it was flickering and twinkling. It was going so fast and so bright, and it was amazing. So then my husband comes back with these hot chocolates. He's a little bit upset because he can tell that something's going on, because everybody is making wows and amazings, and he is staggering up the mountain with 2 hot drinks in his hand. The cream is melting. He can't see where he's going. He doesn't have a light on his head, and he's not got a hand free in order to see, in order to shine a torch down. So he gets to us, and he's overhearing all these people talking about how it's life-changing, and it's already basically finished by the time he gets back to us. So that was just really hard for him, and hard for me, feeling really bad for him, because it really was incredible. And all the other tourists started to leave, and I just had this determination that we were going to stay on that mountain until they kicked us off it, in the hopes that there would be another burst like that for my husband to see. So we ended up staying for another hour. Almost everyone left the mountain. We were starting to panic that we were the last people there. I knew that the time of the last cable car was not for, I think, like another hour on top of that, but people were going down saying, oh, don't miss the cable car. I'm thinking, well, have I got that wrong? Have I misunderstood something? Does it run a different day? A different time, a different day, like whilst we're here? So just as we're starting to panic and wonder, oh, do we go? There was another burst, and it was still pretty good. I would say that it was maybe more like 75% of the sky at this point, and it was a lot greener than what we saw, and there wasn't any of the twinkling structures, but there was movement in them, and it was a massive band of light right in front of us, over where the city would have been if we were low enough to see the city. And I just felt so much better that my husband had seen something incredible, and it was like a private show of the Northern Lights for us in the end, because basically everyone had left the mountain. When we finished watching them, when they calmed back down again, and we realised it was something like 11:15, we were like, okay, right, the last cable car should be like 11:30, 12 o'clock or something. We need to get down the mountain. It's going to take us about 10 minutes to climb down in the dark. So we packed everything up, and thankfully as we got further down, there were a few straggler tourists on the platform still, so we were not the last ones out. There was a couple of people still in the cafe, so we went into the cafe very quickly to just take the extra layers off that we figured we wouldn't need when we were walking back, and pack them away in our bags, and pack the camera up properly and safely, because we had our 45-minute walk back from the cable car station over the bridge back to our apartment to do. So yes, it was about 12:30, nearly 1 o'clock in the morning by the time we got home, but it was the most incredible display. Thankfully, Mr. Yarniverse did get to see the twinkling or the dancing of the Northern Lights before we left. So on our last 2 days in Tromso, we decided we were going to try hiking up to a local dark sky spot in the city itself, that people had seen the Northern Lights at before, and after the display that we had, we were fairly sure that as long as they were bright enough, we would be able to still see them in the city. So we looked out the window on the second to last day, and it was a little bit drizzly, but there were some gaps in the cloud, and the forecast was saying it's meant to dry up, and it was about a half-hour walk up the island to get to this spot. So we thought, okay, well, let's go and try it, because worst case scenario, we've just done a walk and seen a beautiful lake, but best case scenario, we'll see some lines in the gaps. So we hiked up. The drizzle kind of felt like it got stronger at one point, so I was a bit like, oh no, this is going to be such a exhausting hike, and we're going to get there, and it was incredibly steep. So this was actually kind of worse than climbing over the bridge. Even though it took less time, it was steeper. So we'll have done, you know, all of this effort and gotten exhausted, and it being rained on, and we're not going to see anything. But actually, just as we were approaching the lake, which was very pretty, it was easing off. So the first few photos that I was getting a bit of drizzle on my camera still, so I put it away for a bit, and we just kind of sat there and waited, and we did start to see some lights through gaps in the clouds. But the real show was the last minute edition, or I said, other than the one that we saw, but the real thing for Mr. Yarniverse was the last day, and we were deciding, well, should we be staying out late on the last day when we've got to get a flight the next morning? So we weren't even sure that we were going to go, but when we looked out the window, we could see that there wasn't any rain. It was cloudy, but there were plenty of gaps, and the forecast was saying that it should be fine. So we thought, okay, if we start our hike early, then we'll get there at twilight and we can see them quite early, and then if we need to leave before and get to bed on a sensible time, then we could do. So we made the effort. It was a little bit easier to walk up the second time, and it was so worth the effort, because we hadn't even gotten out of the city properly. We were still in the residential area, there was still lights around, and it was still twilight. It was actually still light out. It wasn't astronomical twilight yet. It was like you know, civic twilight, or like nautical twilight, where it's a bit more blue in the sky, and we could see something like white and in the sky that didn't look like a cloud. And as I'm looking up, I'm thinking, I'm 90% sure that that's Aurora, that we shouldn't see at this point because it's too light outside. And when we got to the lake and a lot of the city light was hidden behind the trees, we looked up again, and even though it was very light, we're like, yeah, that's definitely Aurora. So it was so incredibly worth it to turn up, and we got the camera out, and I really focused on this night on getting some good time-lapse footage. So I was pointing it out over the lake with the mountains in the background. So actually the mountains in the background of my time-lapse footage for this day is the mountains on Kvaloya. So that was pretty cool to feel like that connection to where we had been on one of our other tours. And as it got darker, this display only got more incredible. It was so incredibly bright. So even though there were clouds that got in the way sometimes, there was enough of the sky where you could really see, again, that column structure. You could see that green, you could see that red, and at one point, as it's banding across the sky, we get that little twinkling as well. So I was so happy about that. It was about an hour or so into seeing the lights, and there was a lot of movement and brightening and dimming and flowing kind of motion of the bands that were forming, and you could kind of see them kind of swirl. So that was so beautiful. But it was about an hour in when they actually started to twinkle, and I just got so excited singing. That's what it was like. That's what it was like. I'm so happy because Mr. Yarniverse, you know, he really did feel like he kept saying he was happy with what he saw and glad that we stayed later on the mountain than everyone else the other day, but he didn't see those incredible displays. And that last night was so cinematic. It really went on film quite nice, the way that things were floating around, and again with that twinkling. So I did my best to capture that. My astrophotography is a little bit rusty, so I do apologise for that. And also I'm aware that I have been putting clips and photos up in the corner whilst I have been speaking, and that's going to have made them smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the time lapses full screen mode at the end of the video for anybody who wants to go back and watch those and see them in a little bit better detail, because it will be fuller screen. But yeah, just some incredible views. Sometimes things were so bright that we got our phones out, and we could actually, as long as we held our phones steady on the park benches there, we could get some half decent photos without the proper camera and tripod. And I think that for me just kind of showed how bright it was, that, you know, you could get really good shots on just a normal phone, because my phone camera is not brilliant. But yeah, it was such a nice end to our holiday, to have had a relaxing day and then to take this final hike out, and to have been that rewarding, for it to have been properly present and incredible. It was so funny because there were people there who were actually ooh and ah and ooh la la, and there was people from so many different places there, and it was just so nice to share that moment together. And of course there was plenty to do by day as well, although granted, after 5 nights of aurora hunting we were incredibly tired and spent a lot of our day just mooching around in cafes, eating pastries and going out to lunch getting sushi. We had plenty of opportunity to get vegetarian sushi, and in one place we actually had a mango and strawberry, avocado and teriyaki flavoured one, which does not sound like it should work, but we thought it was absolutely delicious and we had to emulate it when we got home. So that was sort of our day-to-day food routine. But we did also go to the ice bar, which is a bar that is sculpted out of ice and has lots of ice sculptures around it, and some of them are incredibly detailed, very pretty. There was also the cathedrals, sorry, because I think one of them is actually a cathedral. The one that is on Tromso Island itself is a big wooden cathedral, but then the Arctic Cathedral is more of a congregational church, and it was designed in this triangular shape that emulated the snowy mountains, and it lights up at night and it's just beautiful. So that was sort of an iconic Tromso landmark. And the other really amazing thing that we did, and I highly recommend, is the floating sauna. So what it says on the tin, this is a sauna that is floating in the harbour, and it's quite big and very hot. And the idea is that you go in the sauna, and then after you've had enough time in the sauna, you go and you jump in the fjord water, which in September was thankfully only 9 degrees cold. But I can't imagine that in December, January and February it's a particularly enjoyable experience to jump in there. So yeah, it was, however, in September incredibly refreshing, and I felt very daring getting into the water. Especially since earlier in the week we had gone for a walk around the harbour wall, and we got some footage of probably hundreds at one point we saw of jellyfish. So this is becoming a recurring theme, because when we were in Northern Ireland we saw jellyfish as well, but those were harmless jellyfish. They were moon jellyfish and compass jellyfish that we saw in Northern Ireland. In Tromso, not so much, because we actually found out that as well as the moon jellyfish that we were seeing in Tromso, we were also looking at blue jellyfish and lion's mane jellyfish. So yeah, it's a good job that we mostly saw them on the outside of the harbour, like in the fjord, actually being swept away by the current, and not so much inside the harbour where we were about to go on this floating sauna and jump into the fjord water. But it was an incredibly amazing trip, and I loved every minute of it. So thank you for being with me here today as I got to talk about all things Tromso, about the yarn that I got to see, the yarn stores, the projects I worked on, the Northern Lights chases, and other daily activities that we got up to keep ourselves entertained. It was truly an amazing trip to be on, and I'm so glad that me and Mr. Universe got to see some absolutely epic Northern Lights. I really want to go again to either back to Tromso or to somewhere in Iceland and see Northern Lights that were that good, because it was absolutely incredible. Some people only go for a few days and hope that they see the lights, but we fully planned in a whole week to make the most of it, and I would recommend that if you can and you wanted to go and see them. Yeah, it was incredible, and as promised, I'm going to leave you with some time lapses of the Northern Lights in better detail. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.